Hi everyone, I'm here with Jason Youngbluth, the author of Weapon Brown, a dark dystopian version of Charlie Brown. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. I am exactly that. My name is Jason Youngbluth. I've been publishing Weapon Brown, among other comics, for many years now. And I've got a brand new one here. I'm going to show it off if I can find a copy of it. Should be able to find a copy. I got thousands. All right. Here's my latest. It's called Weapon Brown Aftershock. Ta-da. It is a follow-up graphic novel, an epilogue, if you will, to the original Weapon Brown graphic novel, which came out, oh, geez, feels like it's going on 8 years, 10 years. I don't know. It feels like it's longer than I remember. But yeah, and I also publish comic books. Deep Fried, Peak, Kobayashi Maru, and Clarissa is a comic strip that many people on the internet are familiar with as well.
And was it The Hero's Journey was the other one?
Yes, Deep Fried, The Hero's Journey is the one I shared with you. That's my most recent project. Deep Fried is the name of an anthology, a humor anthology that I began in 2000. So that was my first foray into self-publishing. It's also where Weapon Brown and Clarissa began as well. But while those two have gone off to be much more popular, I still have a love for the original cast of characters from Deep Fried. I call Deep Fried the last remaining underground comic. And so, in my effort to wrap up the story of Beepo, Roadkill, and Squints, my kind of fabulous furry freak brothers characters, I began a comic called Deep Fried: The Hero's Journey. And it's in its third issue. The fourth issue will be out soon, and maybe I'll be running a Kickstarter to publish all of that as one graphic novel when it's all over.
So as far as indie creators go, you've got a pretty established body of work going for you.
Yeah, I think so. I was just looking over that body of work the other day and realized, wow, I have so many different styles and so many different types of stories. I don't know if that's to my credit, or if it means that it's just harder to sort of pin me down and build a coherent fan base. But either way, it is what it is.
Yeah, one of the great things I was thinking when I was reading Weapon Brown is you probably couldn't get this published at certainly not Marvel or DC, and I think it's good that you went your own route and more true to what you probably wanted to do.
Yes, and I did take a few stabs at getting independent publishers interested in Weapon Brown. I think possibly the subject matter made them a little wary because it is a parody, kind of an unusual parody, but a parody nonetheless of famous newspaper comic strips, not the least which being Charlie Brown. And they might have thought that that would be a little risky, run afoul of the Schultz estate. But I've been publishing it in various forms for roughly 20 years and haven't had any problems. As a matter of fact, several years ago, the Schultz Museum and Archive ordered a copy of Weapon Brown to put into their collection. So I'm always hopeful that one day I'll make it down there and I'll find that they got Weapon Brown in a glass case or something. That'd be nice.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I was really happy to see, because I haven't finished it just yet, but I was really happy to see just how much of Weapon Brown there is to get into.
Yeah. More than I ever anticipated. The story of Weapon Brown, it began, well, the origin of Weapon Brown, it was just a one-off, one-page comic strip I drew in high school. And then later on, when I began publishing Deep Fried, which was an anthology, I needed some filler, and I thought, oh, why don't I explore this story, the one that was hinted at in that comic strip. And that became Charlie Brown versus the Peanuts Gang after the apocalypse. And when that concluded in the pages of Deep Fried, it was pretty popular, so I collected it into a single 48-page comic book, which also turned out to be popular. And I said, well, heck, I got something going here. Why don't I just continue this? And since I'd already exhausted pretty much all the Peanuts jokes I wanted to make, I thought the natural progression would be create a whole universe, post-apocalyptic world where everyone is a comic strip character. And so literally any major comic strip you can name, Beetle Bailey, Orphan Annie, Popeye, Boondocks, Bloom County, Doonesbury, and then finally Calvin and Hobbes, of course. All of them are lampooned in the broader story, which was called Blockheads War, in the same way I had done jokes about the Peanuts Gang. And then finally, I just knit it all together into one gigantic graphic novel that, yeah, definitely took longer to create than I anticipated because there was so much, with so many characters to make fun of. I had to, give each character, each set of characters, a little room to breathe so I could make the relevant jokes. And that ended up being an enormous process. But I'm really pleased with the results.
Yeah, and I do just want to compliment you because it's kind of, when you read a lot of comics, you immediately think, okay, so I'm here for the writer, I'm here for the artist. But when I was reading this, it was really a hard choice between the art and the writing because both are just fantastic.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm pretty pleased with, I don't, break my arm patting myself on the back, but I'm fairly pleased with the way I sort of threaded the needle between a lunatic parody and a straight up action comic, and that was sort of the tone I was going for. Is I wanted to be able to do something that was that was doing two tricks at once. So one is, if you understand the premise, then you notice that all these characters are, it's like, oh, that's a character from The Wizard of Id. That's a character from Marvin or Garfield. But then, even then, it still hopefully works as just a good old-fashioned Road Warrior style action story. But I worked very hard to get the dialogue the way I want, and I never scrimp on the art. I'm always experimenting and doing my best to make it worth the reader's time. And so I'm very glad that you enjoyed both of those aspects.
Yeah, when I was reading it, I was kind of reminded of a combination of kind of classic 2000 AD meets Frank Miller. I was wondering if those were inspirations at all.
Absolutely. Frank Miller, Mike Mignola, Bill Sienkiewicz. Those guys aren't 2000 AD, of course, but certainly the Judge Dredd spirit was something that I interwove into it. My comics are always, maybe this is true for all comic creators, but mine are definitely a stew of everyone who has ever influenced me. There are some pages that are direct imitations of people's styles. Like I did a portion of the Weapon Brown story. I just sort of shifted gears and tried to do it like almost directly in Mike Mignola's style because the environment was similar to a Hellboy story. So I thought, hey, let me try that technique. And there's other portions that are especially in Aftershock here, which is several different stories done in a multitude of styles. And at one point, I do a story that is just meant to be an homage to Frank Miller's Sin City style work, and that is just right on the nose. But yes, there's I always loved Judge Dredd. Weapon Brown himself is a very Dredd-like character in his severity. And his gigantic jaw. So, but yeah, the freak show that is the universe that I created for him to live in could be right out of Mega City 1.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to hear you say that because a lot of people really shy away from their influences. They don't want people to say this feels like someone else. But yeah, I mean, it's really good to kind of embrace that.
Yeah, my goal is always to learn from the influences rather than parrot them. And unfortunately, I'm not good enough to parrot my influences to the degree that anyone would say, "Oh, this is a Miller ripoff or a Mignola ripoff." But I just when I see something that is real talent, it's like you'd be a fool not to try to absorb it and make it your own. I think lately being the last few years, Frank Quitely has been a real big influence on me. He's got such a subtle way of storytelling that has really been my he's my favorite artist of the last probably 10 years. To really give a boost to my own sense of what one can accomplish with line, with storytelling, and but I never try to draw in a way that anyone would say, "Oh, this guy doesn't have his own talent; he can only ape the greats." I don't imitate the greats; I try to learn from the greats.
Yeah, and it definitely shows through. So you said you've been doing it for quite well since high school, I think you said. Yeah. I was just wondering, how long do you plan? Is this you're going to keep going until for whatever reason you have to stop?
Well, I have no other talents, so it's basically this or nothing. But yes, so Weapon Brown is more or less wrapped. It was supposed to be wrapped up after the first graphic novel. Maybe I can grab one copy of it and show it to you. I think I get some over here. There we go. So here's the original Weapon Brown graphic novel. Thing to behold. So I was very satisfied with this story and the way it wrapped up. But then I needed to do a reprint of it because I ran out of copies because suddenly it got big. One person on the internet can suddenly explode your popularity, and that happened to me. So I ran out of merch, and I was like, well, I'm going to need to print this again. So I ran another Kickstarter, and I said, well, if you'll help me reprint the first one, I'll give you a second one. And it wasn't something I really wanted to do because I was pretty satisfied with the way it concluded. But I knew there were some more stories I could tell, and if I could find an interesting way to justify not so much a sequel but an epilogue to the first graphic novel, because I didn't want to really just pick up the story where it left off, then I thought I could do something that would satisfy me. So Aftershock became a slightly different comic. This is set a few years after the events of the first graphic novel, and it's basically different people who have had run-ins with Weapon Brown are talking about, or have heard about people who are telling like campfire stories, and that gave me an excuse to do different types of Weapon Brown material, and also to do jokes about some of the animated specials that I hadn't had a chance to do. But at this point, I think the Weapon Brown story itself is wrapped up. If I do anything else, it might be to collect both of these graphic novels to one gigantic tome, at which point I could probably squeeze in one more short story, but that's a little ways down the line. And then as far as the rest of my comics go, I'm wrapping up other projects. I'm in the middle of wrapping up different ones. Deep Fried and Clarissa are both in their end game scenarios, but that can often take many years before I actually close the book on their stories. But I've also got several other projects that are in various stages of development, and I'm looking forward to the new stuff that I will hopefully be debuting. Probably next year will be when they hit the stands, and in the meantime, I'll just be showing the work in progress to my fans and hopefully garnering new fans.
Yeah, it's always nice to there's a real time investment from a creator. I first heard about you on Comics by Perch, I think.
Yeah, I saw that only just recently. I was looking through YouTube for my name, and I saw that several people had made videos about Weapon Brown that I never heard of. I always wish people would let me know when they're talking about me. But yes, I saw that one by Comics by Perch just like a couple months ago, and I was like, oh wow, I didn't even know he'd covered me.
Yeah, it was something that really stuck out, especially the dialogue that you chose to read out, because it was it's always good to I've had the same experience where I've contacted people saying could I come on the show, and they're like, oh, I actually talked about your comic a couple of weeks ago. So it is nice that people notice your work.
Absolutely, and let me take this time to say I'm flattered that you're giving me your time of day as well.
Oh yeah, it's always nice to talk to creators, and I know there's it's always nice to help get the word out, even if it's just for a few people at a time.
Mm-hmm. Every little bit helps. I'm still below most people's radar, so I have plenty of room to grow as far as my my popularity.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that I hadn't heard about you before, because
I think your audio might have cut out. I don't hear you right now. I'll just wait a bit to see if that recovers. If you can hear me, I apologize. I can't.
It's gone on for so long.
Oh, wait. Thought I heard something.
Oh, your connection dropped off for a second there.
Oh, I see. I can hear you now.
I was just saying, I was happy that I came. I was surprised that I hadn't heard about you before, because it is one of these comics that once you read it, you're kind of shocked that it isn't a bigger deal.
Yeah, well, and thank you for that. It all has to do with promotion and the time. I mean, I'm a one-man show, and it's one of the reasons why I would have liked to have gotten a publisher by now for Weapon Brown. I'm hoping that maybe in the next year or two, I will be able to show this to some publishers who might be interested in reprinting it, because it's never reached market saturation by any means. I think it will look great on a shelf in Barnes and Nobles. But I'm grateful for the attention I've gotten. But I think there's I think a lot of people have given me that kind of reaction. Is that they say, "Hey, where's your Cartoon Network show?" It's about time that that Weapon Brown hit the mainstream. And I'm like, anytime those guys want to call me, but try reaching them. And that's the real problem. Is it's one thing to have talent or a product. It's another thing altogether to be able to navigate the shoals of making your way through the publishing business to reach the right people. It can be very difficult, I found, and unfortunately, it's not my forte. Which is why sometimes I'm surprised that people who I think have less talent than me are making it big, and I'm just sort of scratching away on my stuff, waiting for my ship to come in. But that's part of my plan for the next couple of years too, is to sort of figure out what I'm doing wrong as far as getting my work in front of the people who matter, and see if I can make a go of it again.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel the same way, where there's a lot of people who maybe aren't really interested in comics that much, but they happen to be, they happen to have a big following somewhere else, and then they just dip a toe into comics and they end up getting all this attention. And meanwhile, you've got people who are, the next Kevin Eastman or the next Frank Miller, who are just going completely unnoticed.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, the cream will always rise to the top. It's a kind of the internet has been an interesting development over the past, decades now, but it's provided incredible new opportunities for self-promotion, but there's also so much competition because now everyone's in on this game. And I found this a little bit tricky to get a following on social media or forums and everything, just because I have a tendency to not play well with others, and it just requires a certain set of chops to be able to promote yourself in the way that some people have a natural talent for. But I'm more skilled at pushing a pen around, and so trying to get an adoring fan base based on not on my comics but on my personality. That's a little bit trickier than it might be for some other people. But I'm always working at it, and I think if I have my brothers, I prefer to be discovered through people like you. People who find my comics and then give me a little attention, and sometimes it leads to good things. But I've been thinking that some people have been saying I should do a Patreon. I've been thinking maybe doing videos, especially as I develop my new projects. I thought it might be fun to create maybe a YouTube channel that just and maybe marry it to a Patreon that sort of starts at the ground floor. I introduce the new comic series, try to build up a fan base that way with people who are discovering it before it's even published. That might be the route I go for some of the new projects I'm interested in.
Yeah, and I think that if you reach out, you'll find a lot of people who have probably come across it before who would be happy to have you on.
Send me their names.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've talked about Sin City 2000 AD,
Mm-hmm.
old school underground comics. What else has kind of inspired you?
Oh, wow. Many things. I would say where Deep Fried is concerned, because Deep Fried remains kind of my problem child, in which it's the Deep Fried began with several different casts of characters, as I mentioned, but then I've narrowed it down to mostly focusing on these three kind of stoner buddies, who get up to South Park, Rick and Morty style antics, infused with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So that is it's my least popular creation, to be quite honest, but it's also very dear to me, and that was inspired largely by classic undergrounds, also 80s era comics. That when the indie boom began, that was sort of put the thought in my head that that's the kind of rambunctious type of comic I'd like to do. And Evan Dorkin, especially of the comic series Milk and Cheese, was a huge influence on me. When I started reading that in college, I was like, this is the funniest stuff I have ever read, and I want to see if I can I can play in that guy's league. Another fellow who deeply inspired me as far as the type of content in Deep Fried is a cartoonist named Kieran Dwyer. He did a short series called Lowest Comic Denominator, which was by far the filthiest, most scatological, and absolutely funniest comic I have read. And I've always wanted to sort of top him for outrageous content that still makes you laugh. So in the category of the deep fried style stuff, those two guys have been my strongest influence of just balls to the wall comedy. And then I mentioned some of my influences before from the era when I was young and reading comics. Bill Sienkiewicz was a guy who really grabbed me by the lapels when his stuff started to emerge in New Mutants and beyond. Frank Miller, of course, John Byrne. There's a whole lot of OMAC, John Byrne's OMAC series. A lot of that influenced the look of Weapon Brown. And I still think that guy is the greatest nuts and bolts cartoonist. Little John Romita Jr. Always thought that guy had a very intriguing style. I always think that no matter what era you're in, John Romita Jr.'s work sort of looks modern, and I think that's an interesting quality to his stuff. It's just that there's nothing quite like it. But literally anyone you could name what has influenced me. I mean, writers, Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, to be sure. The whole British invasion, influenced me greatly. I was late to the British invasion. I did not pick up Sandman or The Invisibles or Watchmen when it first emerged. I was about, maybe 10 years behind the time with that. But once I got into it, I was like, oh my God, this is another level entirely. So, most of the majors have inspired me in some way or the other.
Yeah, it's great to hear. I'm a big fan of all those names. I think the thing with John Romita Jr. is recently he's leaned into the kind of squashed face. I don't know if you've noticed that.
I actually haven't read much of his stuff lately, but I got big into him during his X-Men days with Chris Claremont. That was where I first, discovered his stuff. And I've liked a lot of what he's done since then. It's always pleasing to see his work. But what are you talking about with the squashed face? Is that like the way he draws faces now, or is that the way he's always drawn faces?
Kind of. I mean, it's not a criticism, but it's especially if you've seen his like covers when someone's in flight at an angle. It's I don't know, man. It's just a funny observation, I think.
I'll pay attention to that. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, just seeing how styles change as things go on.
Mm-hmm. For John Romita Jr. especially, I don't know, maybe it's just because I really started to get into him during my formative years, but he's the sort of guy where I mean you can say this about anyone who's influenced you, but I always remember like being intrigued by the choices he made for like certain special effects. Sometimes he would mix it up. Sometimes a kind of laser beam effect that or magical effect that he would use in one panel would or for one character would look radically different the next time he did it. And his stuff always had an interesting his like energy effects and things like that always had a kind of an interesting three-dimensional quality. I don't know, but that's just another way of saying that there's a million ways to be influenced by a creator, large and small, and there are always like lots of little tidbits that I pick up from the artists that I like that I will sneak into my own work from time to time.
Yeah, there's a real talent. I've been trying to teach myself to draw for like 2 years, but I think it's something where you kind of have it or you don't.
Yes and no. If you've really got the ambition, then that means you'll do the work to find the right way to draw. And since you're saying that you're interested in learning how to draw, I always recommend a book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. I think the author's name is Betsy Friedman or Betsy Schneider or something like that. Anyway, it's a famous book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And anyone who's serious about learning how to draw and wants to find the techniques that really open up your mind to how it is a person who has natural talent does what they do, that's a great book to read because drawing can be taught. It can be learned. Many people have, and some people try and have the ambition, but they don't have the natural talent, and then they don't find the right ways to get around that. And sometimes they're really gung-ho to draw, but they haven't taken the right approach. And other people who might have been able to do it sort of give up too early. So I would say look into that book. You and anyone listening, read Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
Yeah, thanks for the tip. I'll definitely check that out. For me, I think it's best to start with something simple. So I tried starting out with Batman because it's a very you can draw a Batman with like pretty simple shapes.
Yeah.
And so I can draw like a kind of half decent Batman bust, but as soon as I try doing like facial details or something like that, it just goes all over the place.
Yeah, it's simply a matter of knowing. I mean, with drawing, there's a million different things you need to know. But if you have the ambition to actually
Mm-hmm.
learn how to draw, you'll be able to pursue each level of requirement, with gusto. And but I think one. I mean, listen, I've never been, even when I was young, I was never a terrific artist. I was just better than most of the people my age. But one thing that art teachers don't often know how to teach is what the old cliche is, draw what you see. Well, that's easy enough to say. It's like, how do you draw what you see? How do you translate visual data into what your hand is doing? And a lot of people think that if you have a natural gift for any kind of art, that's something that can never be taught. But the fact of the matter is, it's just a matter of having a 10% difference in the way your hand-eye coordination works, and that really can be taught. And once you pick it up, then you start to realize, oh, this is the way to begin the process of turning three-dimensional things into two-dimensional. And then I'll just go back to that book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, is a really great book that reveals that anyone can be taught these things. It's simply a matter of approaching the task with the right attitude and using the right unorthodox approach to break out of your left brain mode of thinking and draw, as the book says, with right side technique. And so anyway, I've pushed that book on everyone who has ever inquired about drawing, because it's one that, if I had read that book, and I had the book when I was young, but I never really read it because I was an incorrigible student. But if I had opened my mind a bit and read that book, so many things that it took me years to learn, I could have done within a few months. A lot of techniques that I had to grind away to figure out a way to. I could have found out. I could have learned the secrets of those lessons in very short order. So anyway, everyone read that book.
Yeah, read that book, and I'll probably look for a way to read that as well. So kind of a side question, but what kind of are you actively reading new comics?
I just started picking up The Ambassadors by Mark Millar and a variety of artists. The first issue was drawn by Frank Quitely, and then the third issue was done by Travis Charest, another artist that I really liked. So that's really the only new series that I've picked up recently. In the past few years, I've been a little bit more into manga. I was reading JoJo's Bizarre Adventures for a while, and I'm also a big fan of One Punch Man, and that's probably the most the comic book that I've been most into for the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's been a pretty common. Pretty much everyone I've talked to, it does kind of go back to manga, which is kind of funny, but kind of disappointing because I'm a huge fan of American comics myself, and it is kind of a shame that they're not doing too good at the moment.
I think a lot of people say that, and I understand what they mean. I think it has to do. A large part of it is with marketing. I think just the Japanese comic market and the audience it appeals to and the way their industry is built is just very different than ours. Because Marvel and DC have been the 800-pound gorillas on the industry for a while, it's changed the way, for a long time, influenced the way that comic books are presented to the world. And basically everyone is sort of, caught in the wake of their industry. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, comics are comics. It's great if manga is what people are reading. I'm not a fan of all kinds of manga, and sometimes I think the artwork is even when it's great is like a little bit too similar in style between different creators. But I think as long as people are reading comics, there will always be a chance for the American industry to reevaluate itself and to change the way it creates and offers comics. I think, I almost think that maybe we might be in for some good news if Marvel and DC, as big entertainment companies, start to see diminishing returns from these movies and TV shows. We might start to see comics returning to a more fertile period where they're not being commanded by these market forces of basically using the Marvel and DC heroes as fodder for television and video games and stuff. But as far as I'm concerned, all I can say is that I create comics. I want to publish comics, and I'm going to keep doing it for as long as there are stories I want to tell. And I really do think that the upshot of manga is that it's keeping children's interests in comics, especially in America, is keeping children's interests in comics as a medium, and especially paper comics, which I prefer to digital. It's keeping that alive better than the major publishers are doing. I think the major publishers are too focused, and have been for some time, on college-age to middle-aged people, when comics, they can be read by anyone, but you still have to build an audience from youth. Right now in America, the success of the Marvel and DC movies has something to do with special effects, but it also has to do with decades of building good sentiment for these characters, for comic books, and then for the characters in comic books, which have then been translated now successfully to movies and TVs. But in the process, Marvel and DC have lost interest in comic books as a medium because they're owned by these major corporations whose only concern is how much can they milk these characters and squeeze out billions of dollars of profits. They're not interested in creating a new generation of superheroes that can then become the movies of a generation going forward. So they've sort of, in many ways, they've abandoned comics as a medium for children. Manga, at least, is still a medium for children, and I'm always actually gratified when on occasions when I'm talking with kids or I've been teaching workshops or something, when I find out that they're still very much into comics, but they're into comics through manga, because those are the comics that are basically being made for kids, and plus they have they're a lot of them are much more mature and more dynamic than the comics that are created for consumption in the United States. So I'm not. I've heard a lot of people say that they're concerned that American comics are dying and that manga is not their cup of tea. It's like, well, you know what? Maybe there will be a hybrid along the way. But I've even thought recently that my next project, I might get an artist who draws in more of a manga style, just because I think that would be more appealing to kids. I'm not an enemy of manga at all.
Yeah, me neither, and I pretty much agree with everything you said. I also think one of the lesser appreciated things is that manga pretty much always has an accompanying anime, whereas for the American companies, they've kind of divested away from animation, which is really disappointing, and I think really hurt it, because you could pretty much track the real success of comics in America with the popularity of the animated shows like Spider-Man and Batman, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying. Is I think the major properties are too big. They're not meant to be comics anymore. They're meant to be movies. But it's I'm the last person to be able to describe the ins and outs of the marketplace. I don't have a brain for that. I'm just a cartoonist. But I think ultimately the solution to whatever woes comics has always been just make them good and affordable and sell them to kids. The kids are the ones who will then continue reading them when they're adults. But the American comic market is, for better or for worse, it's just too focused on readers that came into the business. That came into the fandom. Decades ago, especially the '80s. A lot of what's happening right now with the popularity of comics in movies and TV is these corporations just reaping the harvest of people who really got into comics in the '80s and to a certain extent the '90s. but that also means the audience is for the comics, not just the characters, but for the comics themselves. The audience is just too old, and unless they're going to, I think Marvel and DC as big, Disney and Warner Brothers or Discovery Warner Brothers. I think they're corporations, and ultimately they're going to eat their seed corn because they don't know how they bought these properties. They don't know how to create them all over again. They're not interested in creating this phenomenon all over again. They're interested in just sucking every dollar out of the Avengers and Superman and everything. And that works from a short-term business perspective, but it's not good for building a new generation of American comic book readers. And that's why I'm, again, very pro manga. Not that I like a whole lot of manga, but I like it that these are comics that still remember that comics are for kids. The joke used to be that comics are just for kids, but now we've forgotten that comics really aren't meant for adults. These are very silly. Superheroes are very silly. But there have been, then we had the 80s where we had, like the British invasion, where we had reimaginations and dissections of superheroes as a genre, and some incredible things came out of that, like The Watchmen. But ultimately, comics are still very youth-oriented, and the more you're pushing superheroes onto adults, the more you're forgetting what the grassroots of comics in America really are. So keep them for kids. Then let the adults get into them again. I'm hoping we'll have a renaissance where once we're done with all these Marvel movies, I'm hoping we'll have a renaissance where American comics have a second wind enters the market of American comics. But if not, there will be manga and maybe other types of comic books besides.
Yeah, I think a big part of that is going to be price and accepting that if you want kids to buy your stuff, you're going to have to start selling it a lot cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's no doubt. That might be one of the hooks of manga, because it's cheaper to print in black and white than it is to print in color. And maybe that's one of the appeals as well, is that these are kind of nice, thick paperback books that are also slightly more affordable than if they were done in full color.
Yeah, and the big two kind of understand that, but they don't really follow through, because every now and then they'll do a black and white thing, but it'll be like black, white, and red, or black, white, and blue, and it's like you're completely missing the point.
That was hey, let me show off my book again, because that was the one of the selling points of Weapon Brown, is that Aftershock, I should say, is that this one has spot reds in it. So that's new for me, because the original graphic novel was only black and white. But I think it's just a matter. I mean, again, I'm not an aficionado of market forces and stuff, but I do think, and of course, Marvel and DC are not the only games in town, by no means. But I think the formula for selling comics is a little tunnel visioned at this point. But you know what? The good news is, as long as people love comics, people will keep creating it, and they'll find a way to inspire new people. It just might not be coming from the big two. And why should there just be a big two? So more comics for kids. We got to remember too that comic books, American style comic books, I'll say, starting with Superman and the old Invaders, which became the Avengers. These are 3 generations old, 4 generations old at this point. It's taken this long for them to become these cultural sensations. Comic books used to just be considered crap entertainment, and they weren't meant to be. They were sold for a nickel. You were supposed to read them, then blow your nose into them and throw them away. And so now they've become this enormous phenomenon. It's quite incredible. But again, this is just the market forces of the goodwill that has been built up over those generations of people. Everyone knows who Captain America is. Everyone knows who Spider-Man is. And now they can take it into, Hollywood for the last couple decades now they can take it into the movie theaters and the TV shows and do special effects that you could never have done before, which makes them look as awesome as comics when you read them. But what's being lost in the process is the fact that the comic book aspect of it itself, the actual print comic books, has just sort of been left to go fallow. That's a shame, but things have their cycle. So the wheel will turn in the favor of American comics again, I'm sure. And as for me, I just like creating them. So there's really no blow to the industry that could discourage me from wanting to keep telling stories.
Yeah, I think for American companies, the challenge is really going to be getting back to readers first and collectors second kind of model.
Yeah. Well, you're from Ireland, right?
I'm British, but I live in Ireland. Yeah.
Okay, United Kingdom. By the way, congratulations. I hope you like King Sausage Fingers the First. But what's it? You tell me, if you don't mind me turning the tables on you. You tell me what's the market like for comics in your part of the world? Are they still big with kids, or is it also like here in the United States where it seems to be more of a 30 and up oriented market?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty much the same. I was in a bookshop recently, and it's they have like a big basically the entire back of the shop is comics and manga.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say comics and manga, I mean there's Civil War and then there's manga.
Civil War.
Avengers, Civil War, and then everything else is just manga.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean it's like comparing the two is just you don't really find comics in bookshops. It's all manga and But yeah, I mean it's definitely the same kind of dynamic between the two.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would suggest that as long as people are into one or the other, there will be crossover between them both. People who've grown up reading manga might start to say, hey, what else could there be? Now, maybe they'll look at the classic American British style comics and say, well, it doesn't have that zing that attracted me to manga, but then maybe the American style comics will follow suit and realize that, hey, as long as people want to read, all you have to do is tune your product a little bit, and you can start to create American style manga that has a little bit of both worlds, and boom, you got a brand new flourishing of the industry.
Yeah, definitely, and fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So for your world, then I don't want you to give away spoilers if you don't want to, but obviously comic strips characters are coming in. Is there anything new on the way?
Well, sure.
Characters?
Sure. So I'll start from lowest to highest. Deep Fried, by the way, let me push my website, is whatisdeepfried.com. And that's where I introduce my new comic strips that are usually collected into comic books along the way. I'm also on Instagram and such. So right now I'm about to publish the 4th issue of Deep Fried, The Hero's Journey. And in the meantime, I am doing Clarissa comics. After a long time, people were demanding that I do more comics about Clarissa. Clarissa is a very awkward character. I describe her as the world's most lovable, abused child. And she started as a one-off strip, and then people, well, I don't know who demanded more. Maybe I just decided to do more. And then it's become this very complicated story about this girl who is suffering horrifying abuse in her home, but it's still a comedy somehow. And so people have been wanting me to finish her story. I trickle the Clarissa stories out very slowly over the years. So I'm right in the middle of a new Clarissa story called Be Mine, and it's coming out weekly as strips on my website. And this is basically I guess it's going to be the second to last chapter of Clarissa's story, where I will finally wrap up her saga. And so that's what I'm going to be working on for the next couple years, is completing the Clarissa story and hopefully attracting new people to read it. Deep Fried, like I said, is also slowly being wrapped up. And if you're into gruesome underground humor, that's something to read. And then with Weapon Brown, I'm right now I'm in the middle of fulfilling my Kickstarter for Aftershock, which concluded a while ago, and I'm now about halfway through shipping my rewards to the Kickstarter backers. And from there, I've got a few things that I've got cooking. I really want to do a sci-fi comic, and I've been torn between several different projects. I always think I can do them all at once, but the trick is figuring out where you really want to go. And I've had one particular story that is basically a sort of a space opera, maybe remnant, what do I want to say here? Shades of Star Wars, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Lord of the Rings, the classic fantasy in space. I've had my idea for that for a while, and the reason I've been interested in that project, maybe more than the others that are fighting for my attention, is because most of what I do is R-rated, so I don't really get to market it to kids. Free Comic Book Day just happened, and there's always lots of kids in the shop, and I'd love to be able to introduce them to my work, but none of my work is really appropriate for children. So I've been thinking strongly that my next project would be an all ages sci-fi fantasy that goes back to what I said earlier. I might start to try to build an audience for the concept, and then see if I can develop this into a project that people want to back with a Kickstarter. Maybe even hire another artist to be the artist on the project, because I like doing art, but especially when it comes to like the action oriented stuff, I just don't feel like I can bang it out on in a timely manner. So I don't want to give away any details about the story because I'm still writing the story, but that could very well be my next big project, is this sci-fi space opera. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I like those kind of things, like like John Carter and Flash. The kind of old school pulpy science fiction. I think those are great.
It's been fun to write because I've just sort of been, writing can be like, everyone's got their own process, but with me, it's sort of like you turn on the faucet, and sometimes what comes out of the spigot there is stuff that I came up with years ago that were like concepts and story elements that never really had a story to go with them. And then as I'm writing this new story, it's like, oh, I could fit that in here, and this would make sense here, and it starts to knit together. And the greatest joy of a writer is when the story starts to write itself, when it starts to take on a life of its own, and you start to feel confident about where the story is going. So I've been doing that for the last few months, is really just generating ideas for this story and trying to figure out what the big themes are, trying to make sure it's not too similar to stuff I've seen before, but also not trying to chide myself too much if it has something in common with something else. And then, the more I write it, the more excited I get about it. The more I'm like, okay, how could I actually turn this into a real project? Because I think this is, I think this is something that would hit the sweet spot that I've been wanting to hit for a few years, but that I haven't really had a chance to. As far as all ages comics, but this could be interesting. So, like I said, I don't want to say too much because it's still very embryonic. But I'm excited to take a crack at a new type of story, different from kind of the grim and gritty and rather cynical stuff that I've been doing for the last few years. So key to that will be successfully wrapping up the other stuff that's fighting for my attention.
Yeah, I had kind of a similar experience as what you just described with my own book, where I had all these different short stories, and then I realized that it actually all worked pretty well together as its own, as its own shared thing, and that's kind of where my comic came from.
Yeah. I've had an unfocused Ultimate Saga in my head for a long time, and by which I mean it's an idea for a story that has like some like huge existential stakes to it, and this desire to do a story like that has it's moved. The idea of doing something this epic has sort of transmogrified from one story to another over the years, and then this is maybe my latest incarnation of it. But at long last, I'm like, I've had this big idea that I've wanted to put down on paper. Maybe it's about time I actually, put it on paper. So I think part of it too is like I have to, when I get this excited about a project, I have to sort of pace myself because I don't want to burn up my excitement too quickly in the writing of it, because then it's like, well, I wrote the story. There's really no need to publish it because now I know what happens. So I'm trying to figure out the big beats of the story without writing the complete story just yet, because I want to be surprised by where it goes. And in the meantime, I'm doing a lot of world building, and that's really fun. That was one thing I really liked about Weapon Brown, is the world building of this rather simple story, but there's all sorts of nuances to it that that are not spelled out explicitly, but that are just woven into the story, so that when I read the story, I know all the history and lore that is never openly discussed by the characters. And that's really the most fun of writing that kind of comic, because it's like it's like you're excavating something that's already there, and it just makes it fun because you know what you've built this foundation, and now you can sort of discover the hidden relics of an ancient civilization, and so that's something I'm looking forward to. If I pursue this other project, I'm looking forward to the fun of all the world building. Dune is a good example of a book that I really like, that just has really tight world building, and you're just interested in what is behind all of this stuff that's never explicitly spelled out, but it's there in the author's mind. And I'd like to do a comic like that, where it's like got a very rich story that you can just sense is lying beneath the surface.
Yeah, I think world building is something that people really, really do appreciate, and it's one of those things that I think you can keep, you can really hold an interest in if you do it right.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering, what's your creative process for world building?
Well, like I said, a lot of it I find is I'm always just, like any creative person, I'm always just coming up with ideas for this or that, and then they're always just sort of in my head, ready to be deployed whenever there's the right moment for them. So part of it is dusting off some old ideas and finding new places for it. But I think in the case of this unnamed project that I've been working on, that's got me kind of excited. I usually just see in my head scenes, moments, bits of dialogue, things that make me feel like I've just glimpsed its future, right? So when I see that, when I imagine a circumstance with, a couple characters having an exchange, and they're talking about stuff, it's like, wow, this really feels fleshed out, even though I haven't really written a story for it. That's a large part of what gets me excited. I get these stories, and I sort of, they're right in the center of a circle, and I want to spread out and find everything that is the past and the future of this moment that I've stumbled upon. And from there, I repeat that with other scenes and other events, and I just sort of draw them into each other's orbit until the story starts to feel natural, like all these different parts were always part of the same thing, and then just sort of sand down the edges and see if I can get these different story elements to work with each other. In contrast to the story that I just described, there's another sci-fi story that I've been writing. That actually two different sci-fi stories that I've been writing, and I one of them is comedic, the other one is serious, and I've been trying to figure out, could I somehow bring those two together? Could they be the same story? And there are days where I feel like they could work together, and then there are other days where I'm like, no, these are just too different. I can't really fit these jigsaw puzzle pieces together. So sometimes the world building can be frustrating because you got these two really great ideas, but you just can't make them mesh with each other, and you have to decide, okay, which is separate them back into their constituent projects and say, okay, which is the one you're going to pursue, which is the one you're going to ditch, or maybe which one are you going to do first. So it's my writing process for something like this, well, actually for just about anything I write, is just letting the story sort of flow through your brain, and then grabbing pieces of it, and then getting excited about it. And then sometimes I'm just making notes, one at a time, or sometimes I'm really in the throes of a brainstorm. And I'm like, this is, okay, this leads to that, and that connects to this thing, and I'm going to change this name because I got a better name for it. And I just sort of patch it all together until it's time to organize it into a single chapter, and then from there it's a matter of just break out the old sketchbook, start to lay out the page, and hopefully you're not flying by the seat of your pants too much so that you don't know where you're going at the end.
Yeah, so I was just wondering whether it's for artists or writers, what advice would you give to people who really want to get into the self-publishing space?
Oh, wow. Let's see. I mentioned a moment ago flying by the seat of my pants. That's more or less my career. I would try to suggest not doing that. Try to have a little bit of discipline. But with me, it was always, I just know what I want to do, and I'm going to just plow through and do it. Excuse me. So advice. Well, I would say start at the start. Create your stuff. The world's your oyster with the internet. You can create a website or get a following on whatever Instagram, DeviantArt is probably obsolete now, but whatever forums or methods there are for sharing your stuff. That's the place to start. Just start creating and show your stuff and work on your stuff and develop a thick skin. That's really kind of important. You got to develop a thick skin because for everyone who likes you, there will be 2 people who have creative criticisms and 5 people who want to tear you to shreds. So you have to be willing to accept criticism. But if you're any kind of artist, you're always going to want to grow. So if you're willing to grow and accept useful criticism, that's a great way to begin building your career through online forums. Is just draw, publish, get people's feedback, and always be working at your craft. A lot of people do come up to me at shows and they want to know how to get their career off the ground too. I would say read, take influences from every kind of art. Don't that was one thing I wish I could have been a little more open-minded towards when I was younger. I've always been very tunnel visioned with the kind of things I do. And it's only after years of banging my head against the wall that I start to open up my realm of possibilities. So I would say just be willing to be influenced by any kind of art. Be willing to recognize that if you reach a dead end with something you're trying, that just means you need fresh instruction about how to get around your own barriers. So you look for books, you look for instructors. Be willing to reach out to artists of any kind, whether you know them personally or can reach them online or have connections that can put you in contact with them. Be curious, be willing to ask questions and get answers, and be willing to study. Your stuff will only increase, will only improve that way. And then as far as the making money off of it aspect, a lot of ways to do that these days. Thanks to Patreon, thanks to Kickstarter, and other formats. There's a lot of ways to get people to invest in your talent if you have talent. Don't be afraid to wait the years that it's going to take for you to build an audience, because some people have really strong artistic talent, and that's immediately evident. But some people, they need a little while to develop their chops and to get people to see them. And you got to be patient. Art is no different than any other business you can go into, any other kind of job you can get. You have to be willing to do the grind and to be patient. And the great thing about being an artist is if you like art, then it's the classic saying is, for a person who loves what they do, they'll never work a day in their lives. Your work and your play become one. And I would recommend that, anyone who's really serious about art, just stick to it and have an open mind and never be afraid to reach out to other people for advice and for critiques.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And if I could say it for myself, I think when you find yourself in a place where you need help and the worst thing that can happen is someone says no, just go for it. And it will probably go pretty well for you.
Yeah. I think I would say most people who are really committed artists are their own best critics. It's interesting for me. I have never had a lot of confidence in a lot of areas of my life, but with art, I just sort of set my sails by that star, and I decided that come hell or high water, this is what I was going to pursue. And part of what's made me the success that I am today is that I'm never satisfied with my own work. I try not to bullshit myself about how disappointing it is or how good it is. I draw, I return the drawing, I look at it, I try to be as brutally honest with myself about what's working and what isn't. And if I see that something's not working, I'm like, okay, that's just the thing I will have to work on. If it takes a week or a year, I will just put my I will figure out where the solution lies, and then do the hard work of solving whatever problem I'm trying to resolve. But you have to be a tough critic of your own work and not be too proud. My general attitude towards my own art is that I don't really know how I feel about a finished project, be it a comic book or just a single page, until I've seen it a couple years later. So I finish it, I'm like, okay, it's the best I could do. I know it sucks, but there it is. And then a couple years later, I'll look at it and I'll be like, oh, okay, that wasn't, that's pretty good. Every once in a while, you'll stumble across a piece of your own artwork. You say, hey, that's really darn good. And you can see it with the eyes of someone who is not, you've got some distance from it now, and you can sort of judge it the way a stranger would judge it. And that's always very pleasing to me. It's like, but I live, as regards my own art, I live in this kind of tension where I know I'm not the worst artist who's ever lived, but I'll be damned if I ever say that I'm a good artist. It'll be years, sometimes even decades, before I look at my work and say, okay, that was an accomplishment. And that's it's an interesting place between pride and self-deprecation, and I think that's just I'm never more honest than when I'm working on my art. That's I guess I would say that's probably my highest virtue with art, is that I do what I can to be truly honest with my what I'm drawing, the stories I write, and also my self-assessment of what I've created.
Yeah, and I think the same can be said for writing. I mean, obviously, it's a lot less labor-intensive than artists, but definitely you want to hold yourself to a high standard, and it can be a bit, a bit frustrating looking over your script over and over and over again and thinking, oh,
Yeah.
that piece of dialogue is a bit cringe, and want to take that out. But for yours, I thought the script was fantastic, and it's very, the dialogue really kind of sticks out. And I mean, some of the lines I'm still remembering, like someone dropped me a line, a real Valentine, and that kind of thing. It was great to read.
From Weapon Brown, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did just want to.
That and there are there are bits of dialogue. I mean, Weapon Brown, I was pretty conscious of what I was doing, so some of the stuff was just grim and gritty, but I always knew it was written to be sort of obnoxiously grim and gritty. And then my goal was, okay, I'm writing these lines which would sound like Dirty Harry style stuff, and how do I make it more legitimate than just this imitation of tough guy slang, but that I understood too that Weapon Brown was meant to be that kind of comic. It's a ridiculous comic, and so you don't want to take it too seriously. So I tried to sort of balance what I thought were sophisticated pieces of writing with just hacky stuff. And try to make it work together. But yeah, there are some things that I've read in Weapon Brown. I'm reading. It's like, okay, that pushed the smugness, a little too far. But then there are other lines of dialogue that I thought, this is clearly trying to be clever, but I kind of like it. It's clever in the right way,
Yeah, I felt the same way. I mean, it kind of felt like a kind of noir film from the golden age of Hollywood, trying to push the envelope as much as they can without going all the way over. But then you turn the next page, and it's more kind of straight up, as you say, Dirty Harry kind of language.
Yeah. This was a case. There were many times when I have Chuck saying something that was well, I think I just said it a moment ago. It's like, you want it to be cool, and the line between being cool and being clever, noticeably clever, can be a fine line indeed. But that's the process too. So I'm pretty satisfied with most of what I wrote for Weapon Brown. I would say more so than even the dialogue, and I like a lot of the dialogue, but more so than the dialogue, I do like where the story went, because I didn't know where the story was going in the beginning. I didn't really have a destiny in mind, because this was only supposed to be a simple story told in 48 pages that then became this 460-page book. But every once in a while, I would reach an area, and then the natural progression of the story would just be perfectly evident. And I was like, I'm not writing this. I don't know where I got this idea from, but this is clearly the way to go. And that made me think that I at least knew what I was doing, even when some of my stuff was not as good as I would make it now. I could at least say, well, you know what, that story was coherent. It didn't require on any Deus ex machinas. It did what I wanted it to do, and that's really, I think, at the end of the day, when you're writing a story, you want the story to work. You want it to be something that will not disappoint and that doesn't have a lot of tricks in it. At least not it does have tricks. It has the tricks you like. But yeah, I think I learned a lot from writing Weapon Brown about not trying to not trying to be too cute with the dialogue. But with Weapon Brown, the original graphic novel, I could get away with it because it knew what it was doing. So.
Yeah, and I think that will really show through for anyone listening who picks up the comic and gives it a read. I think you'll be definitely really happy with it. I know I really had a good time reading it. So I am going to let you go though.
Oh,
yeah, I got to run. It's been great having you on though.
It's been a pleasure. I'm grateful. And could I push my my web stuff one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll leave the links in the comments as well.
Oh, well, that's great. So whatisdeepfried.com is my major site. It's got new strips every week. Weaponbrown.com, if you're interested in learning more about Weapon Brown and then buying the comic, that's a site to go to. It's also got some great animated trailers that I worked hard on, so I hope you'll like them. You can look for my stuff online. Look for Clarissa or Clarissa Crotty, as her full name is. And I'm also on Instagram at death_ray_graphics. And I'm on Newgrounds too for some reason. So if you're ever on Newgrounds, you can see animated cartoons and artwork and comic strips that I posted there as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So thanks again for coming on, man.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, me too.